This program is a Warren Steibel production in association with South Carolina ETV. Funding for Firing Line is made possible by a major grant from the John M. Olin Foundation, Incorporated. Additional support is provided by the Annenberg Foundation and the Friends of Firing Line.
The question has arisen among conservatives whether Newt Gingrich is fulfilling his own or their expectations by continuing as leader of the Republican majority in the House of Representatives. We do not doubt his accomplishments, but some are asking whether the weight of his professional problems weighs down his missions, which have been to revitalize and give legislative form to conservative policies. The question was first publicly raised by Kate O'Byrne, the Washington correspondent of National Review magazine, who is here today to advise us how, after 3 months' observation of the new Congress, her views have developed. Mrs. O'Byrne, a graduate of St. John's Law School, was formerly with the Heritage Foundation in Washington and at one point an aide to Senator James Buckley, and she's a regular panelist for Capital Gang. With us also is Ramesh Ponnuru, a national political reporter for National Review, who is on the scene in Washington and has written about the immobilization of the Republican Party. Ms. Ponnuru is a graduate summa cum laude from Princeton's History Department as recently as 18 months ago. Don O'Sullivan is the editor of National Review. He was born in England, educated there at London University. He has served as right hand to Margaret Thatcher when she was Prime Minister and after she was Prime Minister. And he is the founder of the New Atlantic Initiative launched at the Congress of Prague in May of 1996. He's widely published and lectures on British and American politics. Let me begin by asking Ms. O'Byrne, if Mr. Gingrich is responsible for the lifelessness of the Republican Party in the House, is he also responsible for the lifelessness of the Republican Party in the Senate?
No, I don't believe that he bears too much of the blame for what's going on in the House, Bill. But he is taking more than his share of the blame because of the political weaknesses that he suffers from. Anybody he's in a darn tight spot. Anybody serving as Speaker under these conditions would be. They have a razor-thin majority in the House. They only hold the House by 10 votes. You have newly muscular Republican committee chairmen who, in the first Congress, run by the Republicans, were willing to take a back seat and let the leadership set the agenda. They made perfectly clear they weren't going to let that happen again, which means there's a much more diffuse message. Committee chairmen have an awful lot of leeway. So it's a tough spot for anybody to be in, but Newt is bound to be blamed because of his weakness.
No, but it is generally acknowledged that there is a lifelessness in the Republican Party. Now, my impression of it is that you aren't necessarily lifeless because you have only a majority of 10, but I then ask the question, if the problems of Newt Gingrich weigh down the GOP in the House, what is it that weighs down the GOP in the Senate? What is the reason for this inertia if it goes beyond Newt Gingrich's own problems?
What is infecting all Republicans on their Hill is what they view in November as a near-death experience. They held on in the Senate. They actually picked up seats, which was an enormous achievement given how poorly Bob Dole performed at the top of the ticket, but they don't see it that way. And in the House, they really think that they had a near-death experience. They did not come back in November triumphant. They're coming back, sort of wiping their brow. Well, they didn't get us that time. Thank God. We won't make that mistake again. They have some colleagues who lost races. Many of them were held to very small margins. So they come back very timid.
Well, let me try this out on Ms. Ponnuru. If indeed the Senate gained in Republican seats this time around, why is the Republican movement there so inert? Or is there some umbilical cord to the House of Representatives that communicates that inertia?
Well, I think that all Republicans in Washington are under the impression that they went too far in the last Congress, and are, as Kate said, sort of shell-shocked. They lack confidence in their own
Went
convictions.
too far, went maladroitly?
Went too far, I think, is the reigning. I don't think that. I think we might believe that they simply chose the wrong issues. For instance, that Medicare was not an issue that they should have taken on, and that race and gender preferences is an issue that they should have taken on. But their own perception is they were simply too bold, and now they've got to go along to get along.
Is that how you would put it, Ms. O'Sullivan?
Well, I would agree with that, but I'd add a point, which is to say that although the Republicans won in '94 and survived to win again in '96, they still have an opposition mentality. They still feel that really the Democrats, in some peculiar way, should be running things. And I think the reason is that although they won politically, culturally the country is still in the hands of liberals. I mean, the major networks, the media, the universities, Hollywood, these are all bastions of liberaldom. And consequently, if you're a successful Republican in the House of Representatives, you may get respect there, but the moment you go, say, on the Today Show, or any of these other programs in the morning, you're treated as if you're some kind of weird creature from the Black Lagoon.
Well, I happen to think that's exactly correct, but I'm wondering whether people like Trent Lott and Newt Gingrich aren't onto another set of vibrations than those that suffocate us types. If so, is there no opportunity there to give life to this new vision of what could be done in America if people had the energy and ideals to do it?
Well, I think there is. I mean, I think that at the moment...
Well, to what extent are they immobilized by the specific injuries of Newt Gingrich?
Well, I go back and say, obviously, the fact that Newt got a tremendous pounding in the last Congress, and the fact that he just led them to a narrow victory this time, has made life difficult for him. But we have to ask ourselves, supposing Newt had taken Kate's advice, supposing he had, in fact, voluntarily resigned in order to allow the Republicans to have a different leader and forge ahead on their own. At the moment, what would we be saying? We'd probably be saying, if only Newt were there. We need Newt Gingrich to pull the party together. And I don't think that the answer is to be found simply in changing leaders. I'm not saying that there are circumstances where that wouldn't be true. Sometimes a new leader would be better. But a party's got to have some reserves of loyalty to hold together. You only got to look at England, where essentially the Tories have floundered badly since assassinating Mrs. Thatcher, because they feel guilty. And they feel they shouldn't have done that. And I think that had they dispatched Newt Gingrich with a dagger between the shoulder blades, they would probably be in a worse condition. It's only if a leader, in a sense, goes semi-voluntarily at least, that a party is able to benefit from his going.
Well, the whole question of leadership has interested me a long time. Is he one who manages to coalesce latent sentiments? Or is he one who comes in with a vision which itself attracts a constituency? Trent Lott, for instance, is very vocal on a number of issues we hold near and dear, and yet there's no apparent vibrancy there, or is there, that we outside of Washington don't get?
Oh no, I think certainly on the part of his colleagues, look at the rapid rise he had in the Senate. He showed an awful lot of, I think, leadership skills and nerve. He was a relatively junior member of the Senate when he decided to run for whip. Yeah. It was a darn close thing. He won it by one vote, a very high risk move, I think. No, his colleagues, in fact, we've talked to Republican freshman senators who spent last year in the House, and they breathed a sigh of release because they feel so confident about Trent Lott's leadership.
But that's an implicit criticism of Newt Gingrich.
Last year.
There, John was talking about loyalty, but there really isn't a big reservoir of personal loyalty to Newt Gingrich among House Republicans. He is not much liked, and that's something that you couldn't say about his predecessor, Bob Michael. Even though a lot of conservatives had real problems with Bob Michael's style of leadership, everybody liked Bob Michael. Newt just doesn't have the same advantage.
I think myself that loyalty is a political requirement, even when the emotion of loyalty isn't present in people. But you raised a very important point a moment ago, Bill, when you were talking about, does a leader see latent possibilities? Famous phrase of Disraeli's, that he saw the conservative working man imprisoned in the block, like as a sculptor sees a figure imprisoned in a block of marble. Now, at the moment, as Ramesh pointed out, when they came in 94, the Republicans basically went on an economic ticket. And yet those are not the issues which are principally worrying people at the moment. What worries people about this country is, I think, what one might call the fraying of America. And it's to do with questions like affirmative action and quotas, and like the English language issue and multiculturalism in general. And they are issues which are lying out there for some entrepreneur to pick up, put together in an attractive political package and exploit. And the problem is the Republicans are terrified of them.
Yes.
At the moment, too, loyalty is in a funny way in the House running the other way. Everybody following the November '94 elections felt Newt Gingrich was largely responsible for having the vision and pulling it off, and they felt an enormous sense of loyalty to him. That's reversed now.
They think he owes them now, right?
His colleagues feel that he owes them, that they've stuck by him.
Suppose we were to ask the following question now. Given what you all see down in Washington and in New York, if one wanted to catalyze the Republican Party into a crusading party on a few measured issues, where might it begin? You mentioned affirmative action. In your judgment, is this ripe for national judgment? And should the Republican Party get away from the Camp Dole standoffishness on that issue?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think that Washington Republicans tend to underestimate the appeal of getting rid of race and gender preferences and insisting that the government ought to be treating all citizens alike, regardless of their immutable
are they
characteristics.
afraid of this, Ms. O'Byrne, because of the racist implications it can be made to have?
Absolutely. They watched the debate. I mean, there was a very impressive win out in California, despite a shameless demagogic campaign against Proposition 209, eliminating state preferences. It won by 54% of the vote. But I'm increasingly seeing on the part of the Republican majority, they're becoming sort of risk adverse. We now are running both the House and Senate. The stakes are enormous. If we lose committee chairmanships, we lose plenty. Sure, we won in November, but did it have to be so hard?
We won it in order to accomplish something.
Can't we, in order to hold on to their seats, can't we win a little more easily? Must you ask us to take on these issues where the New York Times and the Washington Post are going to make us, feel like such terrible people?
Sure. But let me ask Mr. O'Sullivan this. It's never entirely satisfactory, is it, to pick up a single aspect of a more general point and accentuate it to the point that it loses contact with the corpus. When Churchill asked that England rearm against Hitler, he never simply put it in the sense of we must prevail against Hitler. He asked for an invigoration in the imagination of what life in England meant compared to life in Nazi Germany. Now, affirmative action ought to be given some ties, obviously the conceptual ties of freedom of opportunity, but how would you link it, say, with stressing the English language?
Well, I think that this is an argument and a debate that goes right back for the last 150 years in American public life.
I want to hear you say it.
Sure. And the answer is that do you think that here you have a country from which people have come from all over the world?
Yeah.
Are they going to arrive here and become Americans, and are their children going to grow up as Americans, speaking the language of the country, being imbued with its history, being proud of its great men and women? Or are they going to remain members of the ethnic groups, primarily loyalty, giving them primarily loyalty that they were in when they arrived? And multiculturalism and the English language and quotas, these are all policies that emphasize ethnicity.
Separatism.
They're all race conscious. And if you have race conscious policies, you make people conscious of race rather than conscious of the ties that unite them as Americans. And so that's I think the appeal. You say, we want people to grow up in this country to be Americans and not primarily to give their loyalty to some subgroup.
When Bob Dole said we're one America, I think in his inarticulate way, that's what he was trying to get at.
Yeah. I note that Professor Glaser, in his recent book, says that multiculturalism is necessarily with us because the unassimilable black protest against the kind of integration you're talking about.
Well,
I hope he's wrong.
I hope he's wrong
Yeah.
too.
But,
I can't say he's wrong.
Let's proceed and link that then. Okay, we have affirmative action, the English language, and we see how you have, I think, successfully rated those. Could you throw in education?
Well, education, and particularly history and English teaching, for example, are very important. For a start, you need a good education available to everybody in order to make sure that some groups don't fall hopelessly behind, are excluded from the labour market, and are not economically participating in the society. But you also need education to imbue people with the traditions and customs of the country. And at the moment, a lot of the schools imbue them not with those traditions and customs and don't teach the values of the American idea, but in fact preach the idea that we're all separate, that effectively our culture is genetically transmitted. That is one of the points of view which you will find, for example, in Afrocentrism. And Afrocentrism is now part of the curriculum on many school boards.
Well, Ms. O'Byrne, would you say that it would be plausible to have Newt or Trent Lott or the successor of either of them come through with a program that made the points we've here been discussing as a plausible package, affirmative action, the English language, and
Education reform, school choice.
Yeah.
It would be plausible in the sense that it would command the support of the majority of the American people. It would not command the support of the majority of Republicans in Congress. And that's the fix they're in.
For out of a lack of sympathy or out of fright?
On behalf of some members, the conference in both houses is overwhelmingly conservative, but there are senior liberals in each conference, unfortunately sitting in key committee assignments. Some of them are unsympathetic.
John Chafee type?
Largely Northeast liberal Republicans are unsympathetic. Others are sort of frightened. Now, with strong leadership, the kind that Newt showed 2 years ago, if he were capable of doing the same thing, I think he could rally maybe the majority of the Republicans, but their first job would be on their own side of the aisle.
What is Newt waiting for? The people in Washington must be saying, okay, he had 10 articles of faith 2 years ago. What articles of faith does he have now, and how can he galvanize support for them?
One reason the Republicans clung last time in the first session to a balanced budget, zero deficit, as central is it's what they could all agree on. More liberal Republicans because their sense of budget housekeeping is offended by not having a zero deficit. More conservative members because they want to see the size of government made smaller.
That's dead, isn't it? Balanced budget is dead.
The balanced budget amendment is dead, but there will be, all year, there'll be an attempt to come up with a balanced budget plan with Bill Clinton, and it does unify Republicans. The idea
it is dead,
budget.
but they don't know it yet.
Right.
And is term limits dead?
And don't you think that partisanship is dead in a way? Because if we were sitting here and the Democrats had won, and the big business had contributed massively to their defeat, we'd be reading about bills to curb monopolies, and there'd be attacks in various ways in big business. The unions contributed massively to try to defeat the Republicans. What is the Republican response? It's to try to get on good terms with the labor unions so that there won't be a big row next time, rather than to punish them. I mean,
it's not going to work, of course.
It won't work, and Republicans simply don't play the game of politics as roughly and as successfully as the Democrats do.
And in the long run, this is enervating, is it not?
Absolutely. Success, defeat enters the soul eventually, and you expect to be defeated, and you act in such a way as to ensure that you are.
Well, I think people listening in to your counsel in this matter would feel cheated if I didn't ask the following question. If tomorrow Newt Gingrich were to say, I think I am a net liability for whatever reasons, is there an obvious successor, or would that be a cause of very robust factionalism?
But that's what's keeping him in power. He's the
Is that it?
he would be gone already if it were obvious who would succeed him, and if that person had the enjoyed confidence of most Republicans in the House. There's nobody who does.
In a
He's the
British
one-eyed man
situation,
and the
this would
king of the
happen
blind.
right away, wouldn't it?
If somebody becomes really weak, then you get contenders emerging. But the problem, of course, is that sometimes there can be too many contenders. And John Major has survived, though in a weak position for as long as he has, because he has about 7 or 8 members of his cabinet who want to replace him, and none of them is sure that he would be the guy to succeed. So none of them put
So
the
you want to
dagger
trip
in.
him up.
That's what's going on with Gingrich right now. There are 7 or 8 people who are jockeying for position right
There's
now.
jockeying going on now. I mean, everybody will explain Newt Gingrich is Speaker as long as Newt Gingrich wants to be Speaker. I think that's probably true, Bill. They will not, I don't believe, be an insurrection. However, should something happen to Newt, an IRS investigation, does he pay his fine in a way, the $300,000 penalty that's still hanging over his head in an unacceptable way? There's a lot of jockeying going on, which is not helpful. I mean, there's a reason why they don't schedule leadership races in the middle of a session.
Yeah.
So that's a real distraction at the moment.
Well, would his strength be hugely enhanced in your judgment if he were to come up with such a package as, for instance, we discussed? Or do you feel that his own weakness would risk a failure to rally forces necessary to present it as a program?
I think he could really help himself
I
by
think he could rally
by getting out of
conservatives.
the balancing budget obsession.
And rally conservatives to his cause. It's conservatives who rallied to him very strongly in January. The few defections he had were from the more liberal colleagues. And he pledged all of them that he was going to be even more vigorous in pursuit of conservative aims. They have not seen that.
Instead, they've seen overtures to Jesse Jackson, which makes a lot of people worried.
To take a second of your time, what's the problem with this $300,000 that he is forbidden to raise it by popular subscription?
On the Ethics Committee has levied the fine unclear where the money can come from. He argues
Indonesia is excluded.
Nothing's excluded. The question is, does he pay it out of his own pocket? He is not a wealthy man. That's an awful lot of money for Newt Gingrich, and he also thinks because
is it intended to be punitive? With some courts say that a punitive judgment has to be paid out of your own pocket.
it's supposed to be compensatory. In fact, his supporters make a point of saying it's actually not a fine. What the committee said is, because you submitted misleading papers, you caused the committee to spend more time on the investigation, and you ought to compensate us for some of that time. The other side, of course, calls it a penalty. Does he pay it out of his own pocket, which, as I said, he's not a wealthy man, and he also worries institutionally. Because it was so partisan and unprecedented, he, out of loyalty to the institution, doesn't want to set a precedent where you can do this to each other, and I think that's a legitimate worry. On the other hand, should he use campaign
But
funds?
he consented to the action, didn't he?
Yes, he did.
He can't challenge it any longer.
No, the
whatever his words.
$300,000 is owed.
Yeah.
But as I said, no specifications as to where it comes from. So his choice is out of his own pocket or out of campaign funds. There's even thought that he might ask, his colleagues might be willing to all pitch in.
Yeah.
And his critics are waiting to pounce yet again.
However he does it.
Right.
So that's a significant factor in the apparent immobilization.
Well, I think his colleagues feel sort of vulnerable. You know, if he were to pay it out of campaign funds, I think they anticipate that there'd be another round of anti-Newt. What a terrible thing, duck responsibility. And they don't want to go through that again. I mean, they were hoping to put Newt's controversies behind them, but there's this one looming, and there's an IRS one looming. The IRS is looking into his activities.
Maybe he could invite a few friends round for coffee and raise money that way.
Does he have a nice guest room? Yeah.
They unfortunately did a poll. Poor Newt can't win. They did a poll knowing that this IRS controversy is looming. Who's more popular, IRS or Newt Gingrich? And I'm sad to report that the IRS is more popular than Newt Gingrich at the moment.
I had 8 students from Rice University on this program last week. It'll be shown in a little bit, and I said, just out of curiosity, is it just, if conceivably, is it possible that anybody here is a Republican? So I want you to tell me how life is like, and deep silence. So I finally said, okay, could you tell me the one feature of Republican activity that is so offensive as to keep you from being interested in it? So one woman student, girl, she said, yes, Newt Gingrich. And I thought, gee, that's an incredibly effective job that's been done to discolor that
yes.
man. And I wonder if one of his offenses is he is also a PhD, and thus violates the canons of the club. Is that part of it, or is it just that they couldn't stand the success of 1994?
Bill, he was the dispossessor, and had to be punished.
term,
And when
good
you think
term.
of the relentless attack, before the public barely came to know him, he was on the front cover of the news magazines within a month or so. You know, the Gingrich who stole Christmas, relentless. And to his credit, he's still standing. I mean, who among us? I'd be in a fetal position someplace. So I mean, I have enormous sympathy because I think it's fair to say it's been an unprecedented kind of onslaught.
But it's not made up out of thin air, these images. You know, these generalized media images are caricatures, but they're exaggerations of things that are actually present. I mean, he does, in fact, have an abrasive side to his personality, especially when you only are exposed to sound bites that he's saying. If the American public were able to listen to, and I suppose compelled to listen to a half-hour discussion by him, they might move to a different view of him, but of course that's not going to happen.
He is easy to caricature, that's true, and has given them a little ammunition, unfortunately.
And he is a traitor to his class.
I agree with that. Thank you very much, Ms. O'Byrne. Thank you, Mr. O'Sullivan. Thank you, Ramesh Ponnuru. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
This program was a Warren Steibel production in association with South Carolina ETV. Funding for Firing Line was made possible by a major grant from the John M. Olin Foundation, Incorporated. Additional support was provided by the Annenberg Foundation and the Friends of Firing Line. For information about a video cassette of this program, write to Firing Line, 2700 Cypress Street, Columbia, South Carolina, 29205, or call 803-799-3449. That's Firing Line, 2700 Cypress Street, Columbia, South Carolina, 29205, or call 803-799-3449.